I'm Will Petersen, excited to roll with you as we break down a very interesting day at Dove Valley at the UC Health Training Center. You got George Paton, you got Sean Payton meeting the media for their pre-draft press conference. A lot to digest from this today, particularly with these guys ultimately not telling us if they're going to trade up, trade down, or stay at 12. But at the same time, there is a willingness, it feels like, for the Denver Broncos to make a deal. And we'll hear from both Sean and George kind of talk about and sort of read between the lines, dissect what we think will happen a week from tonight when the NFL draft kicks off live from Detroit. Obviously, quarterback is the focus of the fan base, and it seems like it's the focus of the GM and the head coach as well. And the first question today, I thought, was an appropriate one. It was from Mike Kliss of 9 News, our 104.3 The Fan Broncos insider, and he basically said, hey, guys, you've had Peyton Manning. You've had John Elway. Does it have to be a quarterback in round number 1?
You know, doesn't it have to be, given this standard around here with more Super Bowls and losing seasons for a long time, Elway, Manning, don't you have to get a quarterback?
Look, I mean, do we have to draft a quarterback? You'd say, man, it sure looks like we have to draft a quarterback, and yet it's got to be the right fit, the right one. And if we had the tip sheets as to who everyone else was taking, it'd be easier to answer that question. And so that's the puzzle here.
What you don't want to do, Mike, is force it, and otherwise we'll be in this position next year and the years after. So you want to get the right player at 12. Our first pick we got to hit on, whether it's a quarterback, whether it's a tackle, receiver, you name it. We need to get an impact player.
So it's the puzzle, right? If Sean Payton could figure out who was going to go 1 through 11, then he would know. He would know if his guy was still going to be there or not, or maybe more importantly, he'd know, yeah, we have to make that panic trade to get to number 4 and get J.J. McCarthy from the Cardinals. Or we have to try to convince New England at number 3 to make a deal with us. Because if the puzzle doesn't fit and they're sitting there at 12 and it's just Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. left on the board, then what do you do? Do you reach for a Bo Nix or a Michael Penix Jr.? Or do you perhaps trade back and maybe say, okay, let's try to get back to 18, 19, 20, 21, or let's try to go all the way back to 28, 29, and take our chances there that maybe Nix and Penix are going to fall down the board and ultimately into your lap in a much more advantageous position. Because let's be honest, no one feels good about taking Bo Nix or Michael Penix at 12. It feels like a reach to take either of those two guys at 12. And here's George Paton talking about who they ultimately want to pick at 12 if they stay in that spot. The old call to move up, call to move back. How much do you believe, George? Right? Call to move up. Okay, if someone in the late 20s wants to get to 12 to get their guy, I get it. Call to move back? No. New England and Arizona aren't calling the Denver Broncos to move back. They are ultimately asking the Broncos, you want to give up 3 first-round picks? Like, they don't want to trade to 12. They want to rob the Broncos blind and then ultimately get to 12. And that's the difference of what George Paton is talking about there. They're getting those phone calls, but the Cardinals and Patriots aren't banging down the door saying, hey, we really want to move back. We really want your 12th pick. They're saying, hey, we'd be willing to do it, but give us this year's one. Give us next year's one. Give us the following year's one. And maybe throw in Pat Surtain the second. Just how much can they squeeze out of the Denver Broncos to move 9, maybe 8 spots up the board? Here's George today talking more about that 12th pick and if they have to take a quarterback. I don't want to put that square peg round hole, right? And that's what I was talking about just a couple minutes ago. Like, is anyone going to feel good if they walk away with Michael Penix Jr. or Bo Nix at 12? Even George Paton right there says we can't force it Now, I don't think George making the ultimate decision. Maybe he's sending a message to the guy sitting 3 feet away from him. Hey, if we take Bo Nix at 12, we are flat out forcing it. And that, I think, could be the difference between George and Sean. George is an old school guy. He's an assistant GM for 20-plus years. Today, even into a hot mic, he had to remind us all how experienced he is, even though his 3 years in Denver have not gone great. But he basically told everyone, I know what I'm doing. And if George gets his way, they're going to take BPA, best player available. Whereas Sean's going to either ransom the future or he's going to reach at 12. And a reach at 12 would, of course, be Bo Nix for Michael Penix Jr. because his boo, J.J. McCarthy, isn't going to be there at 12 if we're just being honest. The odds that McCarthy falls that far even a month ago were 5 to 10%, and today they're 0.05%. I mean, he's not falling out of the top 5. And you could think, I know there's people who think J.J. McCarthy's a second-round talent, that he's about where they took Drew Lock. But it doesn't matter what we think. It's just what one NFL GM thinks, and you better believe that the Cardinals and the Patriots are jacking up that price to ultimately try to get the most out of the Broncos or the Vikings or the Raiders or whoever decides to trade up. Here's George Payton today when asked point blank. I like the question. I didn't think it was going to get an answer, but asked point blank where they have these 5 QB ranked and if they have 5 of them in their top 12.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about our board right now, but I appreciate the question. But I do think it is a good quarterback class. There's 7, 8 quarterbacks that we like that think can play in the league one day. I'm not going to get into, how we have them rated or in the top 10. No, I know, but I'm not going to go there. But it is a good quarterback class. It's been fun getting to know them. 7 or 8 of them, and so we think we can get a quarterback early. We think mid rounds. We think there's going to be quarterbacks, throughout the draft that are interesting to us.
All right, so I appreciate the question, and it's. I'll just give him a shout. It's Eric Goodman. He's a friend of mine. He's always asked the tough questions at these press conferences. I also appreciate George Payton not answering the question. I mean, what's George going to do? Roll out the draft board? Hey guys, here's who we have here. Here's who we have there. But I'll bring you in on this, KJ. Do you believe that they do have 5 quarterbacks in the top 12 and that they absolutely would take Nix or Penix at 12 because they are that desperate when in reality any other year you could probably get them in the mid-20s?
I honestly don't think so. I think the Broncos have 3 guys ideally, and that's not including Caleb, because I think the Broncos have decided a long time ago, number 1 pick, that's just too rich for our blood. So I think the Broncos are in a position where they know that they have 3 guys that they could lean in on. No one is more than likely to. Sean has his favorite. We'll see if George gets a say in it. But I don't think the Broncos have 5 like most people think, if I'm just being honest.
So do you think that they have a specific guy in mind then, and they're going to do everything in their power, whether that be this weekend, next week, or that be when the Cardinals are on the clock at 4? Because we know these things can go down to the wire, right? Literally minutes left in the pick. That Sean's just got 1, and it's JJ. And if the price is the same right now as it is a week from now, he'll pull the trigger on it, and the fan base will go, I cannot believe he just gave up 3 first-round picks and Pat Surtain to get JJ McCarthy. But if Sean feels that way, we've known Sean's the boss, and Sean's going to do what he wants to do.
You hit the nail on the head. It definitely is JJ McCarthy. And he's the type of guy that would go up and get those type. He would package that to go up and get a quarterback. Sean Payton, I don't think he came to Denver to lose. And I think he wants to win as quickly as possible. And on top of that, I think he also wants to prove to Broncos country that I didn't make a mistake. When I let Russ go, I knew exactly what I was doing. When I let all of these veterans go, I knew exactly what I was doing. You guys, liked a lot of these guys, but I had to turn over a new leaf. And, the Detroit Lions, I think, are the most recent example of what happens when you, give up the farm so that you can win right now.
Yep.
And I think they've done a great job. And if Sean Payton believes that the quarterback he's going to draft will get him the same result that the Lions got, even though it's a rookie quarterback, can we really doubt him? No. But the only problem is it's the age, it's the old age, conversation that we continue to have. he's never developed a rookie quarterback. So
Right.
if you move up for your guy, great. But now you not only got to develop him, but we've got to believe that this is the guy you're going to win a Super Bowl with, which neither one are things that Broncos country believes.
Well, and that's the thing. We always talked about how George Payton's legacy would be tied to the Russell Wilson trade, right? Like his legacy was going to come down to whether or not Russell Wilson succeeded because he gave up the future first-round picks, all the other picks, and 3 players. Somehow George Payton still has a job. Again, I've been down that road 100 times. I don't need to go down it again. But everyone looks at George Payton as he's the guy who traded for Russell Wilson. He's the guy who extended Russell Wilson. You know how people are going to look at Sean Payton? He's the guy who cut Russell Wilson and ran him out of town and took on an $85 million bill, an unprecedented bill that he handed to his Walmart owners worth $40 billion and said, you guys pay it because I don't like this guy. That's how Sean Payton's legacy will ultimately be defined in this town. And George Payton, I don't see any scenario where we look back fondly on the George Payton era. I think he is walking toward getting fired, whether that be after the draft or after next year. Everyone needs a fall guy. He'll be the fall guy if the season goes 5-12 because someone has to go, and it's not going to be Sean. But if Sean does this to Russell Wilson and then mortgages the farm, just like George Payton did for J.J. McCarthy, and then J.J. McCarthy comes in and he's just a guy and he's just blah, then Sean Payton's legacy in Denver will be he's the guy who traded the future Hall of Fame corner. He's the guy who traded 3 first-round picks, and he's the guy who took J.J. McCarthy. Like, I think what I'm getting at here is if J.J.'s great, right, and he hoists Lombardi with J.J. someday, then it's brilliant. If J.J.'s just a guy, KJ, then he'll have the same legacy as George Payton. George Payton swung and missed on Russell Wilson, and Sean Payton swung and missed on J.J. McCarthy.
I couldn't agree more. And then the question becomes, where do you go from there? Because you told us you had a guy, George. Okay, we believed you, sort of, kind of. And then, Sean, you came and you really said you had a guy. And then it didn't work out. So now where do you go? Broncos country can't keep asking that question over and over and over again. They've asked it for the past 8 seasons. So if you're Sean Payton, it's not about when or if JJ gets in the building. It's about, do you even know what you're trying to accomplish here? That's the truth of the matter. Sean, he tries to be this cocky, fun, crack a joke every now and then guy with the media, and I think all of that is cool. But at the end of the day, if you're not winning, that stuff gets old very, very quickly. And that in itself will begin to start to turn the tide against you if you do not get this draft right. Now, let me ask you this, Will. Do you believe that they have to leave this draft with the quarterback?
Yes. I appreciate the question, but I feel like I've written that column twice at denversports.com. I've pounded the table. Not only do they have to leave with a quarterback, KJ, they have to leave with a round 1 quarterback. You cannot go to bed Thursday night without a quarterback. Okay? Or if you do go to bed Thursday night without a quarterback, then Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr. better still be on the board, and you better have found a way to trade up to 33 or 34 so you can pick them first or second on Friday night. That is the only acceptable outcome in my eyes. I heard the guys on the drive talking about Spencer Rattler and Michael Pratt, and I appreciate we have to have the conversation. It's nothing Zach and Phil did wrong, but they have to explore all options. But if we go to training camp and the QB room is Spencer Rattler, Jarrett Stidham, and Ben DiNucci, it will be the worst QB room in the NFL. And I think that outside noise is something that George and Sean have probably heard and, frankly, should have to address. And guess what, George Payton? No one knows. Okay, I buy some of that no one knows. But you're not doing your job as a GM and a head coach unless you at least have a plan. I mean, you can't just go and say, well, no one knows, so we're not sure. And I'll give Sean and George credit today. They were able to admit that these first 11 picks are going to be tricky because they don't have a crystal ball. They can't predict the future. But at the same time, I think they understand there's probably about 10 different ways the first round plays out. And the way it's going to play out should be one of those 10 scenarios that you plan for. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's up to Sean and George to spend the hours and put in the hours, and I believe they are putting in the hours, and make sure that they get the right guy. And I think if they want to, they're going to have to trade up. Because, like I said, I don't think Nix or Penix Jr. at 12 makes a heck of a lot of sense. It feels like a reach to go for one of those guys at 12. And here is a little bit more from Sean Payton today on kind of how you have to rank a draft board when it comes to a quarterback versus other guys. Yes, of course, you're going to value quarterback and edge, probably a tackle, maybe a corner over any other position, say a middle linebacker or a running back, positions that aren't as important in today's NFL. James Merritt, editor of DenverSports.com, joins us now to get in on this conversation. James, what did you take away from George and Sean today, and specifically this notion that, yeah, we have to take a quarterback, but we might not if the board doesn't fall the way we want it to fall?
Yeah, it was funny, Will, just listening to them today. Did that not feel like two guys that were totally on a different page?
Totally.
And we've heard it before, right? Like, it's not the first time they've had a press conference where one was saying A and the other one was saying B. But it once again sounded like Sean Payton, I think he kind of let the cat out of the bag at I think it was the Combine when he talked about how, like, they've figured it out when it comes to quarterback and they're getting glad other people haven't. I think he knew J.J. McCarthy was his guy, and he thought he would slip to 12 and he was going to be the smartest guy in the room. But, I think he was definitely like, hey, we got to get a quarterback. That was my vibe. And George came across as, we're just going to trade down, make sure we get enough picks. Whoever's there at 12 will take. We're going to get good value. It was just another example that this is an organization that the GM and the head coach are not on the same page at all.
Well, and I agree with you there. That was my biggest takeaway from it, too. And I thought it was interesting. Zach By said, well, I thought they were cracking jokes at each other and having fun with each other, and I didn't at all. I thought the last question was from Cecil Lammey, and they just tried to one-up each other. They both answered it, and then the next guy answered, and then the next guy answered, then the next guy answered, then the next guy answered. And it reminded me of the scene in the movie Bridesmaids where Kristen Wiig and her rival both have to give the final toast at the engagement dinner. It was painfully awkward with the camera going back and forth. And then, of course, the Broncos say, okay, that'll do it for the presser today. And I was like, wow, both of them really wanted to get the last word in. I mean, is there any chance this relationship lasts, heck, not only beyond this season, James, but after 10 days from now? Because GMs do get fired in the NFL the week after the NFL draft.
Yeah, no, you're right. And that's a great analogy, comparing it to that movie, because that's exactly what it felt like, of like, no, I'm going to say something smart. No, you'll say something. I'll say something smart. It was just back and forth, back and forth. I think we kind of saw the handwriting on the wall. Like, I'm not trying to, make a story out of nothing here, but I will be surprised if come May 1st, this is still the relationship. This is still the dynamic down at Dove Valley. Now, what could change that, though, Will, is let's say they have the idea that we're going to trade up, we're going to get J.J. McCarthy, or we're going to sit at 12 and get Brock Bowers and then trade up and get Michael Penix. Like, if they pull off whatever their plan is and everybody looks at it and says, hey, as a group, we were able to get this done, let's keep it together. Okay. But barring that, like, yeah, man, that sounded like two people that are not on the same page. They're kind of staging, how do I get the attention? How do I get the credit? How do I make sure that I'm the one that looks like the smartest guy in the room? That did not seem like a healthy dynamic. I'll put it that way.
All right, we are on YouTube at Denver Sports. You can find us there and hopefully subscribe to our channel. We have great content every day from Andrew Mason, Cecil Lammey, Rachel Vigil, and the entire Denver Sports team. We're going to keep picking at this because there is plenty of more sound to get to from today's pre-draft press conference, plus an update on Courtland Sutton that was a very brief and kind of interesting listen.